Maxie, I've been thinking, should we do season 3 on the Dr. Joe show? You sure? You sure it's a good idea? That's what I'm talking about.
Very nutty. Peanuts. Little sweetness, almost like peanut butter. That's odd. Lots of cocoa. Tiny bit tangy. Earthy. Lightly earthy. Very nice. Doesn't really taste like any Cuban I've ever tasted. Yeah, a lot of cocoa and some coffee, but really like nice, like kind of like if you had a coffee and milk with a little bit of sugar in it, like a real little bit. Anyway, welcome to the Dr. Joe Show. I'm Joe, and today is a great day for the Dr. Joe Show, its viewers, and for me, because today we finally return to our series on aging cigars. I know it has been a terribly long wait since the first installment of this series, a 3-part episode dubbed All About Aging, the Aging Process, which covered how the process works scientifically, factually, what goes on in your humidor while your cigars are aging, the different stages of the aging process, what you can expect from your cigars as they age, why certain practices are good or bad or, up to preference because of how chemical reactions work within the humidor as the tobacco ages, releasing all sorts of chemicals, breaking down tannins, etc., etc. Wonderful episode. A lot of people really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. It was educational and very entertaining to me. I learned a lot putting it all together. I gotta tell you, there are a couple of reasons why this episode took so long. 3, really. One was that I had so much other stuff to do that was going on with the show. The aging episode came out late in the 2nd season. I was wrapping it up, getting ready, because I knew for a while I wasn't going to be able to record as I started upgrading all the software and hardware that I needed to make the episodes better, getting new cameras, learning how to use them, etc., etc., etc. And then the 3rd season started, and even after that, we weren't completely where we wanted to be. Why am I telling you all this? Because, on YouTube, yes, the Dr. Joe Show is a show, but at times, I like to talk directly to my viewership. Yes, we're formatting it now so it can be played on other media devices where, it can just go into a half-hour episode about cigar history and cigars, etc. But there are also times where I want to stay connected with my viewership and let them know what's going on. So, I had a lot of people saying, please, where's the rest of the aging episode? A lot. Seriously, and thank you for that, because it made me feel really good about the first episode, and I knew a lot of you got a lot out of it. So, once the 3rd season started, again, reformatting the show, lighting, Roku, new websites, more new cameras, second camera, sound equipment, on and on and on. talking to new people, working with new editors. The list goes on. And it was just very hard to finally get to this point because I tell you, I get used to talking about cigars, cigar history, doing the standard cigar review, and talking about aging is a whole different thing. It really is, if you want to make it good. You know, I could, of course, just say, like I when I started the aging series the first time, I could say, yeah, 70 is fine, or even 65 is fine. You know, stick them in your humidor, just make sure the temperature. I could keep it real simple, but most of you out there know that already. And when you watch this show, you expect to learn more than you'll already know. That's why you're watching it, you know? So I wanted to try and present something to everyone out there that could be great for the beginner and good for somebody who's been doing it for a long time, you know? Anyway, moving on to the second part. The second part was, not that I wanted to wait this long, I wanted everyone to really get a chance to watch the first part and to let that all sink in. Because to me, yes, again, you can keep it simple. You can get a desktop, keep it at 70, store a bunch of cigars in there, okay. But if you're going to start buying thousands and thousands of dollars worth of cigars and building winadors and putting them all away and aging them for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, your entire life, you know, you need to know more than 70. You really do. And it begins with understanding how the process works. I urge you, if you have not seen the first part of this series yet, start with that. That is the groundwork. Understanding how the process works helps you solve so many of the problems that could arise later, such as mold, beetles. It helps you understand how to prevent those problems. It helps you start to think about which cigars are good for aging. Which formats are good for aging, which box styles are good for aging, you know, and there are even simple things that are covered, like the sick period. The third reason, finally, was the length of time it took me to put the winador together. Well, not me physically putting it together, the time it took for certain parts of the winador to arrive. Not going to get into all of that now. We'll talk about it when we get to building a winador. So, I promise you, from here on out, the rest of the aging series is going to come swiftly. We're going to have this part, which is, I didn't even announce it. Today we are talking all about humidity, temperature, stability, and then problems that arise and general questions regarding those three topics. We're talking about that. Then I'm going to show you how to season a desktop humidor. Again, a lot of people out there make a big fuss out of it, a big deal. I have a technique that I've been using for over a decade, and it works every time. As long as there's a seal, it works every time, and it's very simple. I'm going to show you that. And then we're going to build a winador together. I'm going to show you what types of wine cooler cabinets are eligible for building a winador, where you can get them, what kind of humidity solutions are available, where you can get them, how much everything costs, where you can get your wooden drawers, where you can get everything you need to put this thing together. And then, of course, how to season it, how to get it running, how to best set it up, and then some tips and tricks and things that I've learned along the way while using winadors. Now, all that being said, I think this is going to be a very exciting episode. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be talking about this stuff. This is what I love to do. I love talking about aging cigars. You know, of course, I love the brand history. You know, I love it all. I love cigars. Aging cigars, though, happens to be a passion within a passion. All of that being said, we are now going to move into the episode. I thank you so much for joining me tonight, this wonderful evening for smoking a cigar. It's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, so first and foremost, RH. RH! My RH is too high. My RH is too low. What do I do? Do I put my RH at 70? My RH is at 65. Should it be at 63? Great questions, but what the fuck is RH? Well, relative humidity. Obviously. I mean, everyone knows that. But relative to what? Now that's a question. We're going to get into some things here that are a bit scientific. And no, you don't need to know what is actually happening. But it does help. It always helps to understand. The more you know, the better off you are. And, you know, as people investing thousands and thousands of dollars and putting cigars away for years and years and years, as connoisseurs and aficionados, this is the kind of stuff we want to know, right? So we're going to talk about RH. RH is the amount of moisture in the air relative to the maximum amount of moisture that air can hold at a given temperature. Now, remember that last part, at a given temperature, because that is very important. And here is where we'll start talking about how understanding things can help. But moving on for now. With relative humidity, you have saturation humidity and saturation vapor density. Saturation humidity is just the first part I talked about, the actual amount of moisture in the air. Saturation vapor density is the second part I said, the maximum amount of moisture the air can hold at a given temperature. When you compare the saturation humidity to the saturation vapor density, you get your relative humidity. It's a percentage. It is the percent of actual humidity in that air relative to the maximum amount of humidity the air can hold at a given temperature. Now, that may sound weird or complex, but it's really not. Just a few scientific terms. You can replace saturation humidity and saturation vapor density with just moisture and maximum moisture. If it makes it easier for you to understand, it makes it easier for me to understand. But I'm trying to give you the real deal here. If you take your saturation humidity, let's say we have a saturation humidity of 5, and you take your saturation vapor density, the maximum amount, let's say that maximum amount at a given temperature is 10, then your relative humidity is 50%. It's that simple. It's that simple. But who cares? We have RH, we have our percentages, we know what percentage should be at. Why do we care about this? Because of the last part. Because of the at a given temperature part. Simply put, if you increase the temperature, your saturation vapor density goes up, the maximum amount of moisture the air can hold. If you decrease the temperature, exactly the opposite. The saturation vapor density goes down. Well, what does this mean? Let's look at the original equation we looked at. We had a saturation humidity of 5. We had a saturation vapor density of 10. That gives us 50% relative humidity. Now let's assume for simplicity's sake that that's true at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. What happens if I raise it to 70 degrees? The saturation vapor density goes up. Again, for simplicity's sake, we'll just plug in numbers. Let's say it goes up from 10, what we originally had, to 15. What happens to our RH? It drops. It drops to 33%. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Don't want that to happen. Uh-oh. Well, this is a very interesting concept, and it means several things for us. Number one, it means that RH and temperature are not mutually exclusive. They are not independent of each other. They work together. And we can see through this exactly how. Temperature goes up. Saturation vapor density goes up. Actual moisture in the air doesn't go up. Just goes down, drops. Now, of course, we're considering we're using a passive humidity source here, not an active one that electronically, or if you're using Voveda, apparently magically, compensates for this. But let's say we're using a good old sponge, you know? But we'll get to that too, because they can work. This is just very interesting stuff to know. So they're not independent of each other. They work hand in hand. On a similar note, 65% humidity, relative humidity, at 65 degrees is not the same thing as 65% relative humidity at 70 degrees. It's not the same thing. As you can see from our equation, there is actually more moisture in the air at 65% relative humidity at 70 degrees than there is at 65% relative humidity at 65 degrees. There's more moisture in the air. You know? So this shows why certain bad things can start to happen very quickly if you exceed a certain temperature. A lot of it has to do with what happens to the humidity. Excess water, making the cigars soggy, making them perfect for mold to grow on. Third, it's a common misconception to think that it's easier to maintain humidity at higher temperatures. As we can see from our equation again, this simply is not true. We need more humidity in the air to reach the same relative humidity, and to compensate for that, evaporation occurs more quickly. Temperature drives evaporation. Evaporation releases water into the air. The air now contains more moisture. The RH goes up. Every time our maximum vapor density increases, the temperature is going up, evaporation is increasing, so everything is going like that. And it becomes too wet. And our sponges dry out much quicker. Everything is easier to control at lower temperatures when it comes to cigars. And we're not talking, even 20 degrees or, we're talking about 10 degrees. A relatively small difference in temperature that can make a big difference in how hard our units work, how long they last, and the disasters that can be averted from doing this, from lowering our temperatures. So now, my friends, we are getting somewhere. We know what RH is. We know what it really is. We know what it's relative to. We know how temperature affects it. And we know what that means for our systems as far as how long they'll last and how much water will be needed to reach the same relative humidity. So think about it. Think about it. A 5-degree difference is very, very small, in these cases. Scientifically, you don't even reach an atmosphere of pressure until you reach boiling, which is, 100 degrees Celsius, which is like, what, too many Fahrenheit for me to fucking count. I'm not good at conversions, all right? But we don't have to worry about that. We're only talking about these small differences that can make a big difference for us, okay? Now we're going to move on to another point about humidity, the dew point. When saturation humidity reaches the maximum vapor density, meaning that the air is maxed out, it contains as much water as it can hold at a temperature, it has reached the dew point and condensation occurs. Pure H2O condenses out of the atmosphere. Now, listen up. All you Wynador guys, this is very important for you, but it's also very educational for anybody else dealing with temperature and humidity, and that happens to be all of us. Anybody out there with $500 who loves cigars is going to want to build a Wynador someday. I mean, why wouldn't you? Unless you're really just the kind of person who doesn't want to have that many cigars around, I don't know. I don't fucking know. I don't understand that kind of person. No, but really. To each his own, everybody's different. But a lot of people are loving Wynadors these days, and this is very important for all you Wynador guys. Now, as we just said, dew point is when saturation humidity reaches maximum saturation vapor density. However, there's a way that can be forced. How? Well, look at our equations. How do you think? Drop in temperature. Sudden drop in temperature. If the temperature suddenly drops, right, the maximum vapor density, the saturation vapor density, drops with it. But the actual humidity in the air isn't changing. So it drops until it hits the point where they're equal and water condenses out of the air. Now, if you have the temperature of an environment and the RH of an environment, you can calculate at which temperature the dew point will occur, condensation will occur. Now get this, because this is the very interesting part. If you have a temperature environment of 75 degrees and an RH of 65 degrees, the dew point occurs at 63 degrees. These are all true numbers. They are rounded a little bit for our, again, simplicity's sake, but they're true numbers. This is a true statement here. 75 degree environment, 65% RH, 63 degrees is the dew point. Now, obviously, it's not going to be 75 degrees in your Wynador unless something's extremely fucking wrong. Please, if it's 75 degrees in your Wynador, stop watching this video right now and go fix it. However, it could very well be 75 degrees on the other side of the Wynador, right on the other side of that thin pane of glass that separates your collection from the rest of the world. And guess what? Guess what settings are inside the Wynador? That's right. The very same numbers that we had from our equation. 63 degrees, 65% relative humidity. You have 75 degrees outside, 65 degrees inside the Wynador. When that 75 degree air comes up against the glass and warms it, and on the other side of that glass, it's 63 degrees, and it's 65% relative humidity in the Wynador, boom, condensation. That water starts to pour right out of the air. And that is how disasters happen. You know, with a Wynador, a lot of people have problems. I've gotten several emails. What do? I can't close my drainage plug because I keep getting water. And because I can't close my drainage plug, I have to refill my tanks every 2 weeks. You know, these are very common problems with a Wynador. And it all has to do with your inside-outside temperature settings. So now you know. Now you know. You either have to cool the air in the outside environment, or you may have to slightly bring up the temperature in the Wynador. You may not like it, but you may have to bring it up a little bit. This is excellent stuff to know. This is, like I said, a very common problem with Wynadors. Condensation, water pooling up at the bottom of the unit, water even dripping down the inside of the glass in some cases. It's too cold in there, or it's too hot outside. You got to fix one or the other. So that solves that, and that's what we call dew point, and it's just another one of those conditions that occur because of the struggle between temperature and humidity. I want to mention one last concept based on, again, the balance or imbalance between humidity and temperature, and that is called equilibrium. Equilibrium is like every cigar smoker's dream, or every cigar aging person's dream. Imagine a humidor with equilibrium. When equilibrium is another concept of humidity and temperature, and what happens is that the amount of water, moisture, coming out into the air is equal to the amount of moisture going back to the source. This is equilibrium, and if that occurred, we would never have to refill a tank again. Unfortunately, equilibrium requires total saturation, at least with a passive humidity source. For instance, a sponge. However, with active humidity sources, it seems that some sort of false equilibrium can be established. I've experimented with Boveda bags over many years and intentionally ran some actual experiments over the last year and a half or so. And I found consistently that the more Boveda bags you use in a sealed environment, in a humidor environment with a working seal, obviously, the longer they last. You know, and I'm thinking, well, why is that? I have more water. There's more water available. You know, and the thing is, they stop releasing humidity when it reaches the rating on the package, 65%, let's say. It reaches 65% in the environment, the Boveda bag stops. If it goes over 65%, the Boveda bags will actually absorb. Now that's really cool, because in some experiments I've seen Boveda bags blow up to the size of like giant marshmallows because they sucked up so much water. And what that basically means is a Boveda bag could literally keep feeding itself and spitting out water again and again if there was a way for that to occur. It happens on a small scale by simply adding extra packs to a unit. See that humidor up there? Michael Dixon, the big one. No, I'm sorry, Daniel Marshall, the big one. That has about 8 Boveda bags in it. But I don't change them out for about 9 months. That's why I always tell people, use a lot. You can't use too many. You cannot use too many because the humidity will not go over the rating. If it does, it goes over by 1-2% at the most. And that's usually the hygrometer's fault. But it goes over, those bags will suck back in the humidity, and they will have that humidity stored for when it needs it in the future. So that wraps up this segment on relative humidity in our All About Aging series. Please do come back next time where we discuss the aging boom. Thanks for watching, and keep on smoking.
Say goodnight, Max.